LinkedIn presents.
Having friends at work with whom you can discuss mental health, it totally changes the game. I'm Morra Aarons-Mele, and this is The Anxious Achiever, the show that looks at the intersection of mental health, leadership, and work, and asks, how can we do it all better?
AI moves fast, and the path forward isn't always clear. Cisco gives you the infrastructure, security, and insights to stay the course. Cisco, making AI work for you. Visit cisco.com/AI.
Transform your growing business with Intuit Enterprise Suite. Automate complex tasks and make faster decisions with integrated tools for financial management, HR, marketing, and more. Visit intuit.com/enterprise to learn more.
It's all well and good to hear the most cutting-edge leadership and organizational research about how workplaces can do better. But today, I want to see what that really looks like in practice. In this episode, I speak to three friends who all met at work at a consumer tech company and who over time built a bond that included being honest about mental health. I speak with them about how they started talking about their well-being and their mental and emotional health, how they helped each other at work through issues of burnout and stress and challenging bosses and more. And most important, how the three friends hope managers at all organizations would do things differently. The voices you'll hear here are Dan, whose voice you'll hear first. He's the one who I sort of got to know of first. And then Zoe, who now works in finance at a different company, and Kelly. They come from different places and they didn't all work in the same department, but they found each other and also found comfort in the open conversations they had with each other, slowly at first. They met in the office at a time when everyone hadn't returned to work yet. And they say that that empty office environment and the loneliness that came with the pandemic era actually helped them open up a bit more than other work situations might have. I started the conversation by asking Dan the question I ask a lot of guests, what his relationship was with his anxiety on the day that we spoke.
Very different than it was even 2 years ago, 10 years ago. Like it's been a journey. I think for me, coming to terms with my anxiety and really understanding it, I've been an anxious kid since I was like 5.
Did you get diagnosed when you were a kid, or was it just something you
It was
all
pretty
knew?
Obvious. Yeah, it's just friends in my family. And then, once my sister got diagnosed with anxiety, I kind of just got roped in. They're like, well, 2-for-1 deal. You might as well bring him along to therapy as well. Been doing that, and it's been, I think good for me. But anxiety has helped me a lot in my career, specifically, working in product as a product manager. Anxiety's whole bit is being uncomfortable with uncertainty.
Uh-huh.
So it's all about how can I refine product requirements, build business requirements, and foresee any potential pitfalls where things could go wrong. And I think my anxiety really lends itself to that and has helped me be very successful in that area.
How? Tell me how.
I think about things that I don't think people with normal brains would consider when you're like, oh yeah, we built this new product, let's launch it. I think I have like a mental checklist of have we considered where it could go wrong here and here and here, and like documenting those. I think anxiety can be one of the most helpful things in your career if you know how to really channel it and take advantage of it. But it can also be, one of the most debilitating things if you let it spiral and get out of control. And I think I've been on both ends before, but I feel like I'm at a place now where I've really come to terms. I'm comfortable with my anxiety. I'm not, letting it dictate where I'm driving, per se.
Would you say when you met these two, you were in a different place with your anxiety?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I had just moved to a new city. Zoe and Kelly were some of the first people I truly met in Boston and connected with in Boston. So coming to a new city and having this giant corporate office basically to ourselves.
So weird.
I know. It's extremely strange. I actually kind of loved coming into the office. prior to any sort of mandate about like you must be in a certain number of days, because it was almost like a safe space to have these conversations, and you could come as you go, and there was no like we will be monitoring you and tracking you. And now it's like all these rumors swirling around of like, oh, they're going to be putting in turnstiles and they're going to track how many hours you're going to be in the office, and you have to be in X number of hours, X number of days. And I'm like, what have you done with my safe space,
So how about your relationship with your anxiety or your mental health in general?
I'm definitely in a better place with it now. I'm definitely in a mindset, I think, at this point in my life where I'm really focusing on taking control of my mental health and having it be like at the forefront of my life as opposed to kind of being on the back burner. I think similar to Dan, anxiety has been a part of my life for almost since I can remember. I was never diagnosed at a young age, but like from middle school, probably onward, I really felt it, but I had no idea what it was. I always felt this looming kind of weight in my chest being like, you're not doing enough. Nobody likes you. I don't know, just these like swirling thoughts all the time. At a young age, I think it was a bit more debilitating. It would lead me to not want to do anything and kind of not perform as much. And I really bled more into like my social life and put more of a focus on that to not hear all of these voices. My anxiety definitely pushed me to feel that more and be super outgoing and trying to make friends quickly and learn new environments. So like I've lived in 7 different states. So like I've had to make new friends. Probably for 10 years of my life, it was like every year or 2 years, I was moving to a new place. So that propelled me to new experiences so much, but then made me afraid of being stagnant. Right before I met them during COVID, and then once I met them, I was going through a pretty traumatic situation during COVID along with the pandemic. And finally went to therapy for the first time and like purged a lot of things that I had been dealing with for a while. So then I think by the time that I had met them, I was at a point where I'm like, okay, I've dumped a lot of trauma, but now I'm dealing with just like this chronic anxiety and kind of depression loop that I go through.
I still got the trauma dump from her, though.
There's a lot to work through. I won't lie. But I think even when I started in that job, I was at a point where I was like so anxious and depressed and not feeling stimulated from my previous role. I didn't feel like intellectually I was being challenged, and I was with myself too much. So I was super excited about this new opportunity going into the office. And then I was in a really, really high stress team and environment. It was a revenue finance role for a public company.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's digital. So like the business never stops. All the Black Friday sales, like any sort of big promotional times like that, we were working. So it's like Thanksgiving, Black Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. You're working like 15 days straight with no breaks.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, good job. But you don't get a pay increase. It's like there's no incentive. So it's just like my anxiety kept me going for a long time to get through that, and that need to achieve and perform well and prove to myself that I can do it and be like, it'll get better. But I burnt out a lot. It really impacted my physical health and my mental health. So then I ended up making the decision to leave there after about 2 years to kind of recheck and do something that had a little better work-life balance, because I know that my mental health is really now like needs to be on the forefront in order for my life to prosper and me to be happy. And now my work-life balance is so much better that I can take that time to, work out in the morning, paint at lunch sometimes, which is great. And like painting is a huge hobby of mine. I'm in a much better place. It's one of those things where it's a muscle you have to constantly be working, but we're turning things around.
How about you, Kellyanne? You were in HR during, that must have been really stressful.
Yeah, I guess again, similarly, it wasn't something I could put a name to. I think I recognized habits and ways of feeling that I thought were personality traits. And so I think it drove me to be a perfectionist and it drove me to be high achieving. And so I'm grateful for that internal motivation. Obviously, it would be great to not have the fear and kind of negativity on the other side of that in
Yes.
order to get myself there.
Yes.
So it's a tough relationship because I can recognize that it's played a really positive role in getting me to this stage that I'm really happy and, I feel like I've achieved cool things and I'm continuing on that path and I've learned a lot, but it also isn't always the most pleasant in the journey. So I think my anxiety manifests a lot in kind of the fight or flight. I'm more of a freezer, actually. And so my anxiety kind of brings me into more of a paralyzed state. So it's kind of avoidant. So I think that when I was kind of grinding to a halt, I think it was my senior year of college, I think that was when I really realized I needed to address it a little bit because going into the real world, you don't have the summer
Right.
break. So it's kind of the constant treading. And I had, like Zoe, I moved abroad and I was teaching. And so I was living by myself for the first time. There would be days where I was not talking to people. And as an extrovert, that was really kind of debilitating for me, honestly. So that was when I really began my therapy journey with anxiety. And so I had a therapist there who was amazing and helped me through. I think that was kind of the trauma point. It was really just like getting me through every day. And so I was like, this is the challenge that will make me a better person. And I'm going to learn so much from this and I'm going to come out stronger. But I was, saying that through the tears. So it was a hard fought battle, but came back and then had a different approach to anxiety and depression. And then down the line realized that some of those personality traits that I thought were deficiencies and flaws were anxiety presenting as ADHD pretty much. That was also another turn to realize that there were some other things at play that weren't just, well, that's just how Kelly is. She interrupts and she is late to everything and and she can't focus on a single task to save her life.
Did you get a diagnosis of ADHD? Or it was anxiety that looked like ADHD?
Exactly. So I thought it was ADHD and I'd been doing all the reading and I went to my doctor and got ADHD medication because I was like, that's the issue here. I had read all the books. And then I did the actual test and they were like, actually, that's anxiety. But it does present really similarly. And so that was another kind of groundbreaking moment where I was like, all of those things that I thought were explained by an ADHD diagnosis were actually just actual personality flaws, things that I couldn't get around, whether it was like responding to texts or being able to complete a single task or, all of those things. It started to feel a little bit more validated that was just a personal weakness. So that's been a journey, but I think that has been something that I've worked with, my therapist now on. I, see a psychiatrist. I've been able to be really open about it at work, being able to talk with Dan and Zoe and our friends at work. And that's kind of how I've gotten to where I'm at now is being able to talk openly about it and hear that it's not just me. It's not all happening behind a curtain. You can be open about it and people can say, oh yeah, well, that also happens to me. It's not just you as a flawed human being, not strong enough to fix yourself. It's just kind of the day to day of life. And whether it's anxiety, mental health, stress, all of those things playing different factors. I think that that's been one of the biggest differences I've noticed of the last couple of years is finding people to talk really openly about it with and sharing the struggles.
listening to you all talk, I'm sort of, thinking like, are we approaching mental health at work all wrong? Is this something that peers just talk about and should support each other, and maybe policies shouldn't get involved and leadership shouldn't get involved and HR doesn't need to be as involved? I mean, obviously there's crises where there would be, but like, how do you all think about mental health as a piece of work?
I have pretty strong feelings in that I think it's bottom up. I
Mm.
think that leadership needs to have policies that allow it to blossom and grow. Giving flexibility is huge. So like return to work mandates, I find incredibly stressful, not just because like, oh, you have to be in the office this many days, but it's
Do you have one, or what's the status?
Currently, yes, we're at 2 days. And then the bigger thing is like, okay, now everyone feels this need to come to the office. The office is very crowded. There are less open spaces to have these sort of conversations. You're a lot more on edge, on your toes. It's hard to find rooms and office spaces and things where you can have these sort of conversations. So by giving people more flexibility, still encouraging them to come to the office, but, not requiring it, you're allowing us to have these conversations. And I think when everyone's on edge about office mandates and policies and things like this, it really hinders those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a ton of like teammate resource groups and things for marginalized communities and voices, which is really helpful and like fantastic. But I haven't seen one for overall like mental well-being and mental health. And I think when you have more of like a grassroots ground up effort where you give the power to the employees more so to tell you how, like, what makes them comfortable and how they would best, be served at work, I think that's usually more effective than, hey, here's wellness week. Here's,
Right.
this one perk for the week. You all get like a 20% discount on Calm.
I also think that the like unlimited PTO can hinder the progression of the mental health conversation, because there's a big theme with unlimited PTO where it's like, oh, we won't give allotted, mandated times off for people because they're like, well, you have unlimited time, you can use it. But usually it works against you that if you use it, you're kind of looked down upon a little bit.
Even though it's unlimited.
Or denied it altogether.
Yeah. And on my team, we were so busy. There was never really like great times to take time off.
I also got more stressed when I would take time off thinking about what I have to catch up on when I come back. And I'm like,
my God. Well, I mean, that's a whole... It sounds like you're pretty open about your anxiety disorders or any other diagnoses. Like, Kelly, are you open with your bosses? Is it something that you sort of bring when new people start working with you? And do you think that's a good policy?
I've had different approaches. I've had a lot of different bosses actually while I've been here. And there were kind of different strategies also because I was in different stages of my adjustment to corporate life. So it was very much kind of like head down, grind it out at first. And then it kind of got to a point where it all came to a head. And I was really, quite frankly, I just wasn't doing my job because I was so blocked. I was very forthcoming with my, my flaws, with my work habits and things that I was working on with my managers all throughout. Among other things, I'd moved to Boston officially and hadn't sorted my prescriptions yet. And so I was off my meds for like a couple months.
Oh my God.
Part of the anxiety, manifestation was I couldn't get myself to do just those small tasks. Calling the doctor and, switching my prescription, that was for some reason Mount Everest for me. Getting to that point is not fun. I don't like letting people down. I think that's honestly a huge source of my anxiety. And so I think that being more open from the jump has been something that I took away from that. I think there has to be a sense of trust and understanding that's already been built there to be able to understand what's actually going to help, because all these situations are different.
I was talking about generations at work and mental health. Sometimes I hear from folks who might be of older generations who might sort of be resistant to all this talk about mental health at work? Might judge it. And you're like, oh, I have had some fun experiences with that. And I wanted to know more.
Yeah. So I had a pretty toxic boss. Most people, when they start a job, they'll have a ramp period. The first day I started, I was already in the models forecasting, expected to like start partaking in the job. And I had never worked in this space before. I had like really no clue what was going on. I had never written any code before. It was expected that I start understanding it and pulling data myself. So drinking from the water hose was an understatement. I was like very overwhelmed. So I gave myself around 6 months where I was like, I'm going to push myself as hard as possible. I don't care. And then it got to a point where like part of the toxicity was not just the work expectations, I guess, of just having to learn really quickly. It was other behaviors where I would be expected to be on video call all day, sharing screen, doing work while someone watched over me.
Even if you didn't have a meeting, you were expected to be on screen.
Mm-hmm. He would just call me and expect me to share my screen while I'm working. I wrote down everything that started happening. I would just write it down because it started to become really bad. And I eventually like sent it to a higher up, and the email was called List of Problems. An example that I gave was one time I just like wrote a if error or a sum if wrong or like something stupid or linked an incorrect cell. And then I undid it like right away. And I was like, oh, whoops, like hate when that happens. And he goes, see, this is why you're not going to move up because you're always making mistakes. So long story short, people had noticed a little bit and like were already cautious of him. And then I told his boss like some of these stories, and I had mentioned that it had got to the point that I was crying once a week at work because of this. And he said to me, like, my advice being, you can't let other people see your emotions like that or something. And like, basically like you should be crying about work.
Suck it up.
Yeah. And like, he did help me through the situation, but it was a really interesting example of, I think, one, like being a woman working in finance, there's not a lot of women at the top. And a lot of that is like, it's that suck it up attitude. If people are mean to you, just fight through it, which I tried for 6 months. I was sucking it up. And I told him, I was like, if I do this for 6 months longer, I can't.
Yeah.
Like my mental health was so bad. It was putting me in such a bad place that I was like, I have to remove myself from this situation if I keep doing it.
This is my question for all of you. Do they really believe that's true?
No, because he's like genuinely, I think he's a very good person. Like I said, he handled the situation really well. Like he would check in with me on a weekly basis. He told me, he was like, please don't leave. We have a plan to move him.
Oh.
He immediately had the conversation. So like, he's the reason I ended up staying for another year after that because this happened. But it was a comment that I was already kind of down. It was hard to have that conversation. It was hard to not cry while I was telling him that. And to have him be like, well, don't cry.
Don't cry.
Yeah.
What do you say to critics who just say, well, Gen Zs and younger millennials they just want to talk about their feelings too much. It's not appropriate for work.
I think that the comment about Gen Z is just, they only want to talk about their feelings. I think that's one of the bravest things that you can do. It's confusing to me that is the statement that it's like, oh, it's just, this is such a weak generation. I think it's really empowering to own your feelings and to speak about them. And like Zoe just told us, she was full boss mode and was still working through her emotions, getting everything that she needed done, learning what was expected of her and how she could cope through it. And so that's really brave, I think, to be able to acknowledge your feelings and keep working through things and then make the decision that that's not the right thing for you. So I have heard the same thing, but I would challenge the statement itself.
going off that too, like something that I could have been better about in that is talking about it more. Like, had I communicated earlier with my manager how I was feeling, there is some accountability on me to have had the conversation more directly sooner and then brought it up maybe sooner so it didn't get to such a head. Like,
well, but you were brand new. Like, there's so many reasons why that was a really difficult thing.
Which is totally a factor. I was afraid that, people would think that I wasn't qualified and that.
Yeah, it's risky. It's risky to speak up. What do you think is behind some of this narrative that emotions and being in your feelings is just for younger generations at work?
I actually have this conversation a lot with like my dad, and then we have like very honest conversations because he kind of sees the same thing. But I think we've gotten to a point now where if you want to attract top talent at your company, you need to enable or, celebrate a company culture that allows for this open conversations and supports mental health. Because of what I'm seeing is when I talk to my friends who previously were in like very competitive industries, whether it was like these large consulting companies or iBanking, people are leaving because they are valuing work-life balance more, and it's not enough anymore to just have these great salaries. So, because I graduated 2019, I remember like consulting recruitment and banking recruitment was like at the forefront. Everyone did it. Like you were all competing for these like high stress, high profile jobs. And now none of my friends want to go back into these industries because they don't have room for these conversations and they can't,
They don't want to become leaders who create different paths? That doesn't feel attractive?
I think they do, but I think they want to go through different avenues to do it. And I think, these like paths that were carved for us by the generations before us of like, oh, you go into consulting and then you go get an MBA and then you go move up the corporate ladder. I think people are finding that less and less attractive and are instead valuing more actual experience, the relationships you build in the office. And like what's been really helpful in my career has been like developing the interpersonal relationships. And I think that's kind of the way that you gain influence and manage up is earning trust.
Yeah, I think that those connections, to Dan's point, are some of the most valuable things to me, especially in work. And to your point, more of wanting to become a leader and wanting to see that change, we've created this culture for ourselves within our peer group here of what we want work to look like for ourselves. And I think that can be really powerful. I think one thing that's kind of hard is when you care a lot, when you express that hope and that vulnerability, and you're working for it, you're trying to communicate and have people understand where you're coming from, there is sometimes a disconnect of, well, that's just not how we do it. That's just not how you get to the next level. I've had advice that it's like, well, don't ever admit to your boss that you made a mistake. Wait for them to call you on it, because you should never show, weakness or admit that you made an error. And so it's like, well, that whole conversation of how would I even get there if these are the things that I value? Because I don't want to sacrifice that.
There's no Venn diagram. There's like,
right. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Weakness. Is anxiety, is feeling anxious in the face of uncertainty still seen as weak?
The example that I'm thinking of is young people in their career seeking out mentorship. You associate people who are uncertain about what they want with like not being driven or not being as like there's these biases that go along with that. And I think that's still heavily prevalent, especially amongst like kind of the older generation, that people assume that if you don't know what you want, you're not trying or you're not driven. But so much of that comes from analysis paralysis too. In this, we have so many paths now that people get bogged down by so many options that it can feel better to just be like, I have no idea. But I definitely think there's still that divide, partially because people used to stay in one career and do it forever. They didn't move around. So if you're uncertain, that's seen as like you have no direction. Whereas we're not linear anymore.
What about if you're anxious? Like if you're anxious, is that seen as weak?
I don't think so anymore. I don't think people care anymore. Like if you have anxiety, I think they care how you handle it in the face, when facing challenges at work and how you use it to your benefit. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be out there like, oh, he has anxiety or she has anxiety, don't put her on this project. I think it's more like, okay, this person is anxious. How do they manage and what are their coping skills that they have that I can trust that they get through this? That's what people see and leaders see is like, okay, how do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with your anxiety and your own personal mental health? But I don't think right off the bat they're like, oh, this person's anxious. Like, I don't think there's that stigma as much anymore.
So many companies are doing the personality type test as a team bonding exercise. And that's so beneficial because then leaders can understand how their people work best and utilize them in the best way possible, as opposed to trying to fit people into what their idea of the team should be.
With the DNA of high-growth businesses, LinkedIn reveals the traits that indicate long-term growth. Among the findings, 80% of the fastest-growing businesses excel in at least 5 key areas. The top 3? Internal mobility, skill development, and AI literacy. Learn how you can structure, invest, and lead in today's market. The DNA of high-growth businesses is sponsored by Intuit Enterprise Suite. Download now at intuit.com/LinkedIn.
The future with AI is moving fast, but progress takes more than speed. It takes direction. Cisco gives you the infrastructure, security, and insights to implement AI with purpose, from data centers to workplaces. We don't just help you keep up, we help you lead. Cisco, making AI work for you. Visit cisco.com/AI. That's cisco.com/AI.
You've all had mental health challenges, like most of us have. Does that experience affect how you see your own ambition? Like we talked about people just not choosing previously worn out paths for leadership because they conflict with values. It's not what we want. When you think about your experiences the past 5 years, does it make you sort of reforecast your ambition in any way or what you aspire to as leaders?
I think that it can vary because I think some people look at it differently. I think that some people are really willing to work on the weekends, for example. To them, that's like not a huge sacrifice because they love what they're doing and they have found a way to balance it. I haven't yet. I don't want to be working on the weekends, be working until 9 at night. That's not what I aspire to do with my time right now. I think that if it's something that people are passionate about and they can be fulfilled by work, I'm happy for you. That's not for me. So if that's what it takes to get into a leadership position, for example, at this job, at the next, then probably I won't end up in a leadership position. And that's okay for me.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of what kind of transpired my decision to leave was the expectation. And in order for me to move up, I was going to have to work even more. Like, you're not going to lessen my workload. You're going to add to it. The pay increase would not be worth that. I was like, I'm already dying here. And then it was hard because now I'm at a much smaller company, which I really enjoy. And I like being able to dabble, like wear a lot of hats and oversee the broader picture. And I work directly with leadership, which I never had in a bigger company, just, because you have way more layers and we were so much larger. I really like that visibility, but I had a lot of people in my ear being like, you're going to really regret going from a major name to this small place. Like, it's going to ruin your career doing that. And if it's going to make me happy, I'll figure it out. Like, if I don't like it, then I'll do something else. And I think it'll be worth it. And now I've loved it and I've been really happy. I end up working on the weekends and at night sometimes.
It's fun.
But I really like what I do. So I don't mind. But it's also sometimes, I get to take a walk during the day. And then if I'm not feeling as productive, then I work at night. Like, I have the flexibility now to work within when I'm most productive, which is the best for me, that I have the freedom to be able to kind of fit work into my schedule and when I'm feeling most enlightened.
I think if you had asked me the same question 2 years ago, it would be a very different answer. I never really understood why I am the way I am. And what I noticed is I was like, why do I care so much about getting promoted or going to the next level? Like I was applying to jobs on LinkedIn and like leveraging offers. And I was like, why am I even interviewing? When did this even start? And all of a sudden I have 3 offers that I'm negotiating between. And I'm like, I didn't even want to leave. Why did I do this? And it's like this anxious brain was like, hey, you need to make a move right now to leverage and move up. Anxiety is it's looking for validation, right? Like when you go to therapy, they will never say like you did the right thing or you're doing the right things, right? They'll never give you a direct answer because that's what it is. It's like you are dealing with uncertainty and you don't know if you're doing the right thing or making the right decision. So for me, the only way to actually get an answer to that is like, oh, I got promoted. Oh, I got a raise. Exceeds expectations. That was the only way in this corporate world of me validating that I was doing the right thing. I think once I started understanding and like peeling back the layers and seeing like why I was working 80 hours or why I was doing 2 jobs or why I randomly enrolled in grad school, like I was like, oh, okay, I feel this need to be doing more to move up, to tell my anxiety to shut up finally and be like, okay, you're doing the right things. And it was getting to the point where I was like, I am loading myself with so much work and activities and things that I can't be doing more. Like I literally don't have the time in my day, so my anxiety can't be like, hey, do more. Obviously I still want to get promoted and move up and be a leader and maybe run a business one day, but it's not as important. There isn't as much of a timeline and as pressing urgency anymore.
So data show that peer-to-peer support for mental health is really powerful. And a lot of times when companies aren't offering the scaffolding that maybe people need, we turn to each other. And it seems like that's something you all have figured out. Maybe you could share some advice for listeners. You all sort of were thrown together in this office. How to intentionally find your people. If maybe your company has an ERG or business resource group for mental health, but if it doesn't, like, how could you find your people and create that peer support?
Well, I mean, if your company doesn't have ERGs, create one. I was an ERG leader at 2 different companies. They're an amazing resource to be able to find like people with, throughout the company that you don't work directly with and just expand your network, but also find people who you share common interests with, who may be struggling with the same thing. So even if they don't exist, that shouldn't stop you. You can make your own. I also think the lunch table is just a great way. Like ERGs are really good too if you work remotely. You're in a virtual environment. It's a really nice way to feel like you're building that connection if you don't have a physical office to go to. But our friend group at work was really created because of the lunch table. I mean, my outlook is just like, you want to go meet new people, just go sit with them and introduce yourself.
But around mental health specifically, like finding people who you feel it takes time, you got to build trust.
Starting by building that trust is building that friendship. You've got to befriend the people that you work with. You've got to establish some sort of relationship with them outside of work.
Yeah, I think that was one of the hardest things for me in finding the group at work was really a couple of things. The trust of it and putting yourself out there. I think they are really hard. I was new to Boston. I saw this group. I knew the individuals, but I wasn't fully in the squad yet. And sometimes I was intimidated by the lunch table. It can be
There's
difficult.
a middle schooler in all of us.
Exactly. And I, consider myself an extroverted person. And I was getting really frustrated with myself for not, I was like, I know them. We are friends. We do chat. And yet there would be times where I was like, I'm just going to eat lunch at my desk. It's fine. And so there's, I think, a balance of it with, put yourself out there, trust that no one's going to look at you and go, ew, I can't believe that you would ask to sit here.
Especially not at work.
Exactly.
And if they do, they shouldn't work there.
No.
You don't want to be friends with them anyways. But yeah, I think being able to give yourself grace as you're looking for it, like it does take time. And I don't think that I appreciated that. I was like, I need friends now. And it's a bummer that I guess I'm not going to have best friends at work. We're just going to hang out at work. Like, that's fine. But now, like, I hang out with Zoe and Dan and our, work friends all the time. And it's really special and empowering that I get to see them at work and, but I get to, have that common bond, but it takes time, and being able to give yourself the time to naturally get to know people and become friends, and then, kind of following your own natural path, I think is really what got us to being such genuine friends. It starts by the proximity. You're in the same office, you're kind of new to the city, you might as well chat. Then it's like, well, we have to eat lunch, we might as well sit at a table. There aren't a lot of people in. Okay, fine, I'll join your table. And then you start going in, and because of the familiarity, it kind of can grow from there. But it can be hard. So I would say giving yourself grace and patience to build the genuine connections and not try and put something into a mold that was helpful for me. And it was a lesson that took me a long time to learn, but I'm really grateful that these two were patient, and we all, have been able to be consistent and create great friendships from there.
I'd say the advice I'd give to anyone is the worst thing you can do when you're in the office is sit down at your desk and never leave. I joke that like I'm a bit of a nomad at work and no one actually knows where I sit because I'm always like doing rounds and like.
It's not even a joke. That's just accurate. That's just what he does.
But like part of it's intentional, right? Because that's how you get the FaceTime and build the relationships, and almost intentionally. It's like a running joke that no one actually knows what my job is or what my job function is or what I'm doing. And in some ways, it almost created a barrier of work within the workplace of like, I have this friend group now at work. No one knows what each other does. They don't know where I sit, but I can still exist within the workplace as like Dan the person, as also Dan the employee. You get a good pulse on the company and how people are doing in different areas. And you can tell when people are getting, more stressed or when they're not. Checking in that way, I think, is really important for developing those connections. And the other thing is volunteering or any sort of like company events where they get you out of the office, but with people from the office. So we did a volunteering event at, like a 5K where we all go volunteer and set up for the race. And you meet people from all over the company. You get out of a work environment and you can start having conversations that lend themselves more to, deeper questions like, oh, how are you actually doing? And I think that was also really important for me.
What do you wish managers knew about being more mentally healthy at work? What would you do differently?
I'm not a morning person. I know Kelly probably relates to this because she's chronically late, but like I am really bad in the morning, and like I really struggle to get up. I used to have sleep anxiety when I was in high school because I would sleepwalk throughout the night because I would always be late for school. And people said I would grow out of it. I haven't.
You're a fire watcher.
No, I've slept through a fire alarm before. It's really bad. Yeah, that happened to me in college. So having to be at the office at like 8, like if I have a job where I have to be there early in the morning by a specific time and that kind of counts against me, I'm not the person that needs to work like that. I'm much better at night. And other people are much better in the morning and they don't want to work late. Like giving people the freedom to feel that they can work when is best for them and not have these kind of like arbitrary expectations that cause anxiety of like, if you're not here at a specific time, you're not a hard worker, or you're not good at your job.
It's kind of along the same lines as Zoe's. I think that people are really different, and I always go back and forth with this because I know that in order to be a large company, policies have to exist. There have to be performance metrics. There are some of those hard, rigid things that you have to have in order to be organized. Mm-hmm. And I get that. But I think that there is so much that goes unsaid around those things about what is motivating people. And it feels like the, motivation that is coming from leaders is trying to scare you into doing a good job, or, dangle a consequence in front of you that's like, we're watching you. This is the only way that you're going to get promoted is, we're looking at every move. And so I think that there are ways to, or I guess that would be my ideal, is that we could find a way to maintain the structure and the organization. And, yes, you have to have discipline. And if you're not doing your job, like, totally understand there have to be consequences. But I think that there are ways to encourage people based on motivation that is not just
fear-based.
Just fear-based, exactly.
Yep.
And when you go and ask your team members questions about that, and, you're like, I have an open door policy, actually making it open, listening more, understanding that there are motivating factors there. It's not just, I'm trying to get out of, doing the day-to-day of my job. Maybe it's a lack of resources. Maybe it's a lack of, explanation of expectations. Maybe it's unrealistic expectations. So I think that maybe that's a little bit too fantasy, but understanding people's motivations and taking the time to understand how we can get the best out of people without having to resort to the everybody's in the same line and you better do everything the same way in order to move forward.
I think for me, the most important thing is your manager taking a vested interest in both you as an employee and as a person and merging those in some way. One of my favorite bosses of all time, we had to fill out a individual development plan, kind of basically lay out what you want to do to get promoted. And his whole thing was you had to have at least one thing not related to work on your plan. So for me, it was always like, Dan, we're going to teach you how to ride a bike, because I still can't ride a bike. And I never learned, but it was always on my plan. But he just genuinely cared. So it got to the point where, it was like a rocky time with the company. We were getting reorged, and he kind of tells me, he goes, look, Dan, we might get moved to a different org. You can, either go this way or keep doing what you're doing, or you can come with me. We can do this new job function. I was like, I'm going to go with you, because the manager relationship for me was so important for how happy I am at work.
Yes.
That I valued that more than the work itself that I was doing. I was like, I'm willing to go learn and follow you into this new path because I value our relationship. I think that's how you earn the trust of your employees, is being a person with them, being a human and gaining empathy and earning trust with each other. Because it goes both ways, but I think you have to have a very candid conversation when you join your company with your boss about what motivates you. What are your ways of working? How can they best support you? What do you want to do with your life? Things like that have been super productive for me, and I think very valuable in terms of my overall well-being and work in the workplace.
That's it for this episode of The Anxious Achiever. The show is produced and edited by Mary Dew, with production support and sound engineering by Nick Krinko. If you like what you heard, head to your favorite podcast app. Leave us a review. It really matters, and we appreciate the time and effort it takes. And if you don't subscribe or follow the show already, now's the time. And let us know what you'd like to hear more of. I get some of my best ideas from my listeners, so find me on LinkedIn, send me a message. You can find my weekly newsletter there as well. A big thanks to LinkedIn and all the listeners out there and our guests in the Anxious Achiever world. Until next time.